have great panelists here to talk about science, diplomacy in an age of division. I won't take more time in presenting them again. However, as we have seen in this great forum, we are living in turbulent times in the world. We are also seeing dramatic changes in the global balance. We are seeing more conflicts than we have seen since the end of Second World War. We are seeing more displaced people around the world with a record high of 120 million in last year. These displacements have many reasons, but the main ones are conflicts, climate crisis, and also human rights situation in different countries. We have seen very interesting lectures and remarks here at this forum on the consequences of climate change and how everything is interrelated. And I actually thought it was very remarkable yesterday to see how actually climate change in the Arctic, which is happening at a much greater pace than elsewhere in the world, might have a huge effect, for example, on the monsoon here in India. And the monsoon is the backbone of Indian agriculture, so we are seeing changes in the Arctic actually affecting food security here in India. We are also seeing the fact, and we have here Pema from ICIMOD with us today, the fact that the melting of ice in Himalaya can affect the water security of billions of people. And at the same time that the climate crisis poses a severe threat to our lives, our rights, and our health, we also see a growing distrust in science and even denialism when it comes to climate issues. And this is something that we have also experienced connected with other things, and I might mention the pandemic, where we really experienced a growing distrust in science. So at the same time, and this is my personal view, I think policymakers should really look to science and data to make informed decisions and informed policies. We see an increase in distrust and denial when it comes to science. And then I'm not talking about having healthy questions and criticism, but denialism. And at the same time, we're dealing with new technologies. And of course, they are very unevenly distributed around the world, but already having an enormous effect on debate in the Western world. And there I'm talking about artificial intelligence. But artificial intelligence is also going to influence science, labor markets, and everything, really, we do. So we all know how the Arctic Council has developed after the Russian invasion in Ukraine. We also are very familiar with the tensions that the new US administration has created with their comments on Greenland. But now we also see that the US administration is putting severe pressure on the US universities, the flagships in the United States of America. And we actually see some US academics leaving the country to other universities. So there, I would definitely say that science is under pressure, just as many values in international collaboration have been under pressure. This is a transition period, and we need to talk about science diplomacy in these times. And I think I would just ask my panelists here to give me their first thoughts on this situation. You all come from very different backgrounds, even though you're all great scientists, and you're experiencing this situation probably differently. But I would like to begin with you, Jean, Envoy for Climate Change and Northern Arctic Affairs for the government of Québec in Canada. What effects you see this pressure on science having on Canada, but also the proximity with the US?
Well, first of all, thank you. I'm really happy to be with very good friends. I'm a scientist. In my other life, I was an explorer. So I did the Northwest Passage in 2002. And at that time, with our sailboat, we were the 7th boat of the history to do the Northwest Passage in one season. We returned 13 years later, in 2015, we saw no ice at all, and 52 boats were waiting to do the Northwest Passage. Just to show you that it's moving really, really, really fast. So what we need is good science. By the way, Quebec is a province of Canada. Canada is not the 51st state of US. Canada is a country up north and will stay a country up north. But I really think that we need good science, and we need to make a safe space for scientists to help politicians and policy makers. For example, in Quebec, we have a chief scientist, and we also have scientists in residence in our different offices. We have near 30 offices in 19 countries, and we put scientists there to be sure that science is really close to decision maker, and also really close to the real fact, because it's not only science right now. It's we need to have the real fact to make good decision. So I think that science more and more has to be closer to politicians, and this is what we try to do in Quebec.
Well, that's very interesting. I would like to move to you, Ravichandran, because we were listening to your Minister for External Affairs, and he was describing his vision of how India can play a bigger role on the global stage in the next years and decade. How much will science affect the policy of India in the next few years, and how do you see that developing over the next years?
Thank you. Thank you very much. And first of all, I thank the Arctic Circle and ORF for bringing this forum discussion in India, in New Delhi. As you all know that this Arctic is warming roughly about 3 to 4 times of global mean. But at the same time, the tension around the Arctic also rising. I think both the things, in order to diffuse, I think science is the only way to diffuse this both warming scenario in the Arctic as well as the tension in the Arctic. I believe the science is the main goal. Because science is the unifying force, and also even some of the times when the divisions happen, the science is the key. Why I am saying so? Because the diplomatic negotiations are very important in terms of scientific knowledge. You take it many things, either you take it about IPCC or COP or many of the Arctic Council working groups, all deals with the science. They make unification force. That's the main thing. And also you see that now the International Arctic Science Council and all other, maybe the scientific forum has to be activated, because many things are unknown in Arctic in terms of science. What we are predicting, what we are maybe forecasting, or what we are projecting the climate change is happening now, or sea ice or anything in the future, what we are predicting is not coming true in reality. What we observe is different. That means what we know is less than what we thought about. So for that, we need to have more and more observation in the Arctic, and more understanding in the Arctic, and more and more modeling and prediction and all other things we need to be keep in mind. For that, one nation, even Arctic states alone, or maybe even few countries together, we cannot take that much observation. Either you take in situ or space or anywhere, you have to go in a multilateral approach. So because Arctic is, whatever is impact is happening is not local, it is a global. Similarly, global partners has to come together to observe and understand the Arctic Ocean, so that we can think about what is the global common future scenario exists. That is more important.
I would like to maybe add a question to that, because I mentioned earlier that India might be severely affected by climate change in the Arctic. I refer to food security, water security. Would you say that India's ambitions are connected to that, you could say, national threat, or are they more about taking more space on the global stage? So what is your view on that?
As our minister said already, it is also threat in some way in terms of climate sense, because whatever is happening in Arctic sea ice reduction, the monsoon extremes are happening more, so we have a problem. Though the average rainfall over India during the monsoon remains same, but Arctic melting complicates our things in such a way that extremes are happening more. Some place more rain, some place less rain, so that we are encountering two problems instead of one problem. So this is number one. And also, we are also giving a feedback mechanism. Whenever there is a more extreme rainfall happening in India, the heat available in the atmosphere, it is all the way transported to the Arctic, thereby more melting is happening. So it is a feedback loop, It is a feedback loop in that process, so we are affected. And also Arctic also affected. Since Arctic is affected, entire global is affected. So that is why we need to understand, and we are more concerned about the Arctic because our food security depends on monsoon rainfall and others. So that is one of the reasons we want to understand more, we want to make things. So that's why we are making more and more global partner to understand the Arctic in better way. In India, polar program mostly governed by the science.
By the science.
Science is the main thing. We started not only in Arctic, in Antarctic. Even in Antarctic science, of course, the science is the currency for Antarctica. Similarly, I think it should be a currency for science, also currencies in the Arctic. Then only we can have a global working together, so that for global common, we can collectively work together in that aspect.
Jan-Gunnar, you talked about scientific collaboration yesterday in a panel with the Emirates. Are you worried about scientific collaboration in these times, since we see these geopolitical tensions happening around the world?
Yes, I'm worried, and science has challenges today, climate change science and many other fields. And we have to stand up for science as a global community. I think I will come back to some of the challenging issues and problems. I will start on an optimistic note, if you may. And I describe the situation in Norway, where I see a space, and actually a new space for science diplomacy developing, and that is connected to security. We have had white papers every week this year, and all of them have a red thread, and it's about security. Even in my sector, research, there was a recent white paper on research systems, and a large part of that white paper was about security. And we are actually changing fundamentally the way of thinking of research in Norway. We will open up a new portfolio or a new program in the Research Council devoted for dual use. That has never happened before in Norway. So it's still not the majority of the research, of course, and research need to be independent and follow all the values that research should. But it will be a 12th portfolio in the Research Council, opening up for research that the idea is that the defense sector and also the civil society meets and will actually produce classified information, know-how. So the knowledge preparedness or science preparedness is a very, very important topic going on in the national debate. At the same time, we have an excellent research institute, Defense Research Institute, located in the south, like many of the institutions in Norway. It's a uniform decision in the parliament that they will open a branch in the north. So they will come to the north, where most important theater for potential conflicts. And my own university, we spent quite a lot of energy and time in the leadership meeting up with many disciplines and branches of the military and the defense sector to investigate if we as a university can offer some educational programs or research, so the society as such is using the resources in an optimal way. So it doesn't make much sense if you are developing a defense medicine educational program and we have the same, and some of these are identical. So we are looking for the opportunities to join forces. So this is a new space for science diplomacy nationally, and I will shorter make a comment about what's going on also on the what we call the North Calotte, which is northern Sweden, northern Finland, and northern Norway. We have an alliance among 6 universities, two in Finland, 2 in Sweden, and 2 in Norway, that was invented 10 years ago. It was a typical mobility of staff and students and some kind of projects going on. Now we extended this to what we call the Arctic 6 Extended. And one work stream here is about security. So last Monday we held the first Arctic Security Conference ever. So we really engage. And the last thing to mention is that we are also joining forces with the EU and the research mechanisms that are there in the framework program to investigate how we in the EU context also can strengthen knowledge preparedness.
Okay, so you actually see progress in scientific collaboration, at least from Norway's point of view?
In this field,
In
yes,
this
but
field.
I will come back to some of the more problematic sites, if you allow me, later, because
okay.
it's not only white here, it's also some darker colors.
Pema, you are the Director General of ICIMOD, so you have to deal with all the countries surrounding the Himalaya and the people, of course, living in the Himalaya. So let's say that you are kind of, you have to practice diplomacy every day in your work. So tell us a little bit about how you have seen that developing in the last years and how you envision it in the next years.
Very interesting question, I would say.
It was very diplomatic.
But we all know that the geopolitical processes are very dynamic. And we also know that the geophysical, geoclimatic changes are also dynamic in this region. The impacts of climate change, the geoclimatic dynamics should actually unite us. And it is, because we feel that climate change impacts everyone, all the countries, the 8 countries that we are working for, but we are focusing on the mountain areas. So the mountains should not just divide us, but mountains should also unite us, because the impacts on the mountains are same across the Hindu Kush Himalayan region. But given that the geopolitical processes are not always in favor of coming together and working together, we should not use this as an excuse for not cooperating, not coming together. And that is where science comes in. Scientists speak the same language. When scientists talk about water, they call it water. When scientists talk about temperature, they call it temperature, ice, and so on. So, when scientists speak the same language, and then when the scientists have an opportunity to interact with policymakers, with bureaucrats, with decision makers, that is when the unity comes. That is when we develop collaboration. So that is where we are actually, reaching out to policymakers, decision makers through what we call science policy dialogue, where we bring the scientists, the policymakers, decision makers together, share the information, the evidence, and convince the policymakers to make changes, to cooperate, and so on. So we are dealing with all these transboundary issues. Look at climate change, it affects everybody. It doesn't matter the size of the economy, the status of individuals, it affects everyone. Therefore, there is every reason for us to cooperate. We are looking at natural disasters caused by climate change impact. Disasters don't stop at our borders. It needs transboundary cooperation. We are talking about pollution, air pollution. Air pollution is transboundary. It doesn't stop at our borders. So all these issues require transboundary regional cooperation, and ICIMOD, the International Center for Integrated Mountain Development, is dedicated to foster this collaboration.
Well, Well, I think I have been following your work very closely for the last year, and I must say I am impressed by this kind of where actually science and diplomacy truly meet every day. But I want to move on again to you, Jean, because now we see the big countries in the world are flexing their muscles.
Yep.
And we who live close to the Arctic, we know that there are different indigenous groups living there.
Absolutely.
And I have heard a lot from them in the last months. They feel a little bit left out in this dialogue between the big and the strong. And I know that you have also been collaborating with those groups.
And I think this is very, very important. You know, we had 2 great days, but what I heard is, you know, the importance of resources and how we will open new route and all that. But don't forget that there's people living there. You know, that's their home. And they're great people. They showed me everything, you know, on the ice and everything. And I know them a lot and I really like them. Mm-hmm. And I think that, you know, they will welcome you, you know, with arms open if you do the right thing. If you include them in your project, not only at the end of a proposal on, you know, few lines on the importance of Inuit and blah, blah, blah. They saw that for decades. Mm-hmm. This is not what they want anymore, you know. They want to be involved. And I'm going to give you one example. With UK, Canada, and the Inuit community, we did a project, a research project, very high level, and they were part of it. They were in every science group that was working in the Arctic, and they were there around the table from the beginning. If you want information, it's called CNOOC, and it's a very, very nice project, and we change the mentality, because what they don't like is scientists arriving in a village, took the data, leave, and that's it, you know. They want to be part of it. They want us to include them in our research. So this is very, very, very important. If you arrive there and you're not prepared, you won't have a warm welcome. So it is crucial. And by the way, at Laval University in Quebec, we gave courses for scientists, you know, to prepare them to go on the field and, you know, deal with the Inuit and local communities. So for me, it's crucial.
It's definitely one of the challenges. And Jan-Gunnar, you mentioned challenges.
Yeah.
After you had been very positive.
Yeah,
so.
a few words about our relation to Russia. When the war broke out, everything stopped. No more political contact, of course, no more institutional collaboration. Norwegian authorities allow for one-to-one, scientist-to-scientist collaboration. But in practice, that is also frozen because there is some hesitation and I think freight on our side if we expose our friends and colleagues on the Russian side by reaching out. So basically, things are frozen. Then there are 3 holes in the brick or wall of sanctions, and that's one on search and rescue for the reasons of life, and there is one on nuclear waste and also preparedness, and the third one on the fishery management in the Barents Sea, and that's connected to food security. So that's the 3 holes in that brick of wall. But our Prime Minister has said, we closed the door to collaboration with Russia, but we haven't thrown away the keys. I think that's a perspective that is also important for the scientific community in a broader sense. We are now these days very, very worried for good reasons what's happening in the United States. There are elephants, as President Grimson has spoken about, but there are many elephants. And yes, we have to solve today's pressing issues and handle them from day to day, week to week. But we also need to look further into the future, and all wars will end. And then building back is not an easy thing. It will take time. Trust is broken. But I think we can say from the Norwegian side that we also look ahead must be something brighter coming in the United States, in Russia, in the long term. And that is a perspective I think it's extremely important to bring also at the table and be having some attention to in these extremely difficult times.
Two elephants that were mentioned here. Ravichandran, if I could ask you to tell me shortly, and the rest of the room, the biggest challenges for Indian science diplomacy in these times.
Yeah, I think, yes, there is a problem when the political tensions are happening. It is also a problem with the scientific observation or scientific collaboration also is going bad. I always look at it when there is a space station, whatever happens, we all collectively go together. Either you Russia or US or any other country. But when it comes to Arctic, why we are stopping? We should follow that. That is what I am advocating. We are advocating that. I think whatever the tensions are happening in political, I am again advocating that science, there is no barrier. I think we need to go on. Even Antarctica, there is no much, what is called, whatever the collaboration, we continue. But I think a similar way in Arctic also, I think it is imperative that we need to collaborate and cooperate in science so that we trust between the partners, so that we can collectively work on science aspect. And finally, we look at it a global common, and it is a good for Arctic region as well. So that is what we have to make it, and I think we should not, especially the Arctic Working Group, has to come force, maybe when the new regime starts. I think it is imperative that we need to collect all actors together so that we can work on science. Ultimately, we go on work on science, then the political things will merge. So that's the way we are looking at it.
Pema, because Himalaya have a global effect. We have mentioned the water supply for billions, but the Himalayas also have people living there. 250 millions-ish? Yeah. So when you are dealing with the challenges in the Himalayas, what comes first, the global effect or the local effects, or do they go together? And can you describe a little, because Sean was talking about the importance of involving the people that live there, how you have managed to do that?
Right. Thank you very much. I think I'll just pick up from where I left. I think the trick is to remain completely neutral. Be conscious of the sensitivities, the concerns of individual member countries. And I think we know how to do that because we are aware of what are the sensitive issues between our member countries and so on. That is fine. Now, as you mentioned, the Hindu Kush Himalaya is actually the source of most of the major rivers in Asia. 10 of the largest river systems actually originate from there. That's why it's called often called the water towers of Asia. Now, we are not just talking about the 250 odd million people living in the mountains and the valleys in the mountains, but we also have to take into account that something like 1.6 billion people living in the river basins of these rivers, the Indus, the Ganges, the Brahmaputra, even Mekong and so on. So we are talking about the food security, energy security, and the livelihood security of close to 1/4 of the world's population. And there is now an increasing recognition of the connection between the mountains and the other ecosystems, the coastal areas, the plains, where to the meltwater from the Himalayas flow. It drains into the Indian Ocean. So we often do not connect the snow melt and the sea, the snow and the sea, if you like. So taking all this into context, there is, first of all, a growing need, increasing need for our national governments to recognize the importance of the mountains and the ecosystem services that mountains provide. And then for the national governments also to recognize that while we pursue security interest, scientific interest, economic interest, for the people living in the vicinity of the mountains, it is about survival interest. Yes. Because we are exposed to all sorts of natural disasters, avalanches, landslides, snowstorms, windstorms, floods and so on. It's already happening in more intensity and frequency. Yesterday, a colleague from Ladakh mentioned that, this is something that we have to live with every day now. And let me just draw a quick analogy on that. So there's no perfect time for us to act. We know enough to act now. There's no perfect time to cooperate. We have to cooperate now. Because if you look at, how we can translate science into practice, practical solutions, sometimes we leave science at, at the science publication level or information level, but doesn't translate into practical actions. Now, this is a story that I would like to share with you quickly. Geospatial scientists went to visit, just for contextual thing, I will say Ladakh, and met a shepherd, and he just told the shepherd, if I can tell you how many sheep you have, can you give me one sheep? So he said, yes, agreed. And then the scientist took out his computers, did some calculation, used remote sensing, whatever, and came out with a figure. Where you have 400 sheep. And then the shepherd said, yes, how did you do that? Okay, I used this thing. And then the shepherd said, if I can tell you who you are, can you give me back my sheep? Then the scientist agreed. And then the shepherd said, you are a researcher. Then how do you know that? Because you, first of all, tell me what I already know. I already know that I have. Okay. Secondly, instead of taking a sheep, you are taking my dog. So let us act now. That is my idea.
That's a very good one. Did you want to add something, Jan-Gunnar?
Yeah, climate adaptation has not been discussed a lot here. And I think sometimes it goes down to the really concrete issues. When other things, it could be security, but it could also be economy, is in a way more important for a politician, it could be a local one, than climate adaptation. We know, and that this is science diplomacy to communicate, it's 5 to 10 times more costly to repair than prepare.
Yes.
And that's a very simple communication thing. But in my community, we have demographic challenges, so schools are closed down or potentially. And of course, if you're a politician, why should you, if you don't know that it's 5 to 10 times more costly to prepare, to repair than prepare, you would save the schools and you don't do anything on the climate adaptation.
Jan, a very short comment?
Yes, I think it's really interesting. We have two committees, one on climate change, one on adaptation. They are scientists that are not part of the government, and they publish the report publicly. So the policy makers have to react to those independent scientific report on adaptation. And you're right, we should talk more about adaptation.
I will be opening the floor to questions soon, not yet, because I have two speed questions for you. Number one, and it would be nice to have very quick answers to that, but in your jobs, are you experiencing that new technologies, social media, artificial intelligence is influencing the public to distrust science more than before?
Yes.
That was a quick answer.
Of course.
Yeah. You agree?
Of course.
Yes.
Yes, and I think different generations use different information, and that's also a challenge, actually.
So young people, do you think that young people have less confidence in science?
I learned that we have made studies of that, and young people have different information, but they don't oppose to many of the kind of like climate, while the elder people do, actually.
Exactly. Pema, what do you think?
Yes, but it's a double-edged sword.
It's a
So
double-edged
right
sword.
information is good, wrong information can work the other way around. So
Yeah.
we have to be mindful. Yeah.
Another speed question.
No.
I noticed that you are all men, which is
Yeah.
not bad in itself. But we have had more men than women contributing to this forum. How can we engage more women in the science community, very shortly? And wouldn't that be a very positive factor for science diplomacy?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's true. It's really important. And you know, I work a lot at the UN at different conferences, and there's more and more women, and I think it's really important. We even started a major group at UN for women to be sure that they have a voice. But it should be in our community more and more. Absolutely.
Yeah, it is imperative that we need to involve more and more because half of the population dump their ideas, views, and other things. We need to take it on board so that we can have a better picture of collective wisdom of that. We need to involve.
Well, it goes without saying, it will be a richer society with everybody taking part in it. Things are changing though, and I think in the longer term, women will take over, but we can't wait for that to happen. So we have to stimulate this. And I think we often lift up the young people, which is good. And I think also the gender is sometimes becoming more of an appendix. We talk about it, but we don't really put in the efforts to make that happen. So, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. We are happy that you are there to moderate.
Yeah, well, I correct the picture a little bit.
Yes.
But I must say, I place my trust in you to help in this, because we need more female leaders, not only in politics, but also in science, simply because women are, 50% of the
Absolutely.
humankind, and they should be here represented evenly. So I just had to make that comment. But now I'm going to open up the floor, and I already see loads of hands there. Oh my God. And I ask you to speak loud and clearly, and there are some microphones on the way, I hope. Yes, they are there. Yes, I have 4 of you here, and I will begin with you. Please. Yes, and just state your name and be short and concise, loud and clear.
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Wieger Slachter. I'm from the Netherlands Embassy here in New Delhi. In the previous session, we talked extensively about the exclusion of Russia from the Arctic Council, at least from the decision-making processes. It was also mentioned that Russia is a very important polar nation controlling around half of the Arctic region. So the exclusion of Russia means that there is limited or no access to scientific data from Russia for their part of the Arctic. My question to you is, as scientist, to what extent is that a real problem, the limited availability of data from Russia about the Arctic region, and to what extent can that lead to maybe incomplete data and judgments on what's going on in the Arctic region? So I will be interested in, from a purely scientific point of view, to what extent that is a problem in practical terms.
Thank you. We have many more questions, but I think it's best that you, Jan-Gunnar, answer this.
Briefly to that question, it is a problem. And the reason is also that we interrupt long-time data series, which are critical for understanding climate variation and what's natural and anthropogenic and so on. So the longer we miss information data from Russia, the worse it gets. So we are very concerned. We can some way compensate by having more intensive satellite observations, but that's mostly for the surface or near surface. So for the oceans, for example, we miss a lot of data, and permafrost thawing is one of the elephants in the room, so to speak.
So I'm going to pass the floor to you, please.
My name is Ram from Polar Educators International. I don't have a question per se, but just a suggestion from my friends from the indigenous community in Arctic Canada and Greenland. One is that there's a very strong voice that there cannot be sustainable development without the people being involved, in the sense of having the philosophy back in the PhD, and to a great extent having humanities and social science when we mention sciences as well. One thing that I completely concur is a lot of the Arctic is more like Ladakh and Upper Mustang in Nepal. Dry toilets, no running water, partial electricity, one run, $2,500 flight to Ottawa to get supplies, possibly no food, Sinuk, as you mentioned, or Inuit Nunangat, it's about living off the land, off the ice, off the sea, and water. And it's very important for us to acknowledge that. And my only submission to organizations in India is that when we study science, I think it's important to collaborate with the communities there. Otherwise, it's a very myopic understanding of the Arctic. That's the point that I had to make.
Thank you for your point. Not exactly a question. Would you like to comment on that?
Basically, we mean science means it is not only physical science or this one, it is also social science and political science together. That's what science diplomacy.
Yeah. And in the age of new technologies, we also need to study humanity and not only technology. But I think you are next, and then you. So please, yes.
Hello. My name is Anand Sharma, and I'm a weatherman. My question to the panel is there a plan by Arctic Circle to initiate a cooperative research institute like CERN to upgrade research and science in Arctic region? That's one. Second is, we have learned through all this discussion, there are threats, there are opportunities. If we ask this panel, if you have to give marks out of 10, how much marks you will give to threats or to opportunity?
Okay.
Thank you.
How much?
So how do you balance threats or opportunities? Do the threats seem bigger than the opportunities when we look at the Arctic? Concerning the Arctic Circle Assembly and the Polar Dialogue, of course, we aim to facilitate and really increase scientific dialogue and scientific collaboration, but also the dialogue between scientists and policymakers, which is maybe what we need the most now. But a little bit on the threats and opportunities.
Lots of opportunities, some scientists, because one thing is sure, with the US position right now with the Trump administration, we should not punish the scientists. We are, a family working in the north, and some of our friends are in trouble, so we have to help them. So we welcome them in our Canadian University and Quebec University with pleasure. But there's lots of opportunities. There's also a new solidarity between the others that I can feel, and this is very, very important. And I think that this is what we will see in science in the Arctic.
Please.
Yeah, from India's perspective, I can see that threats about 40% because of monsoon and sea level rise. These are the two things threat. When you talk about opportunities, of course, it is ship routing as well as resources, both living and non-living resources. The opportunities are huge. So I would put 40-60.
Okay, we have a number here. Jan-Gunnar.
I regard the threats more dominant than the opportunities. We are in a hybrid situation with conflicts going on. If it would evolve into something similar to war, climate and environment and all these things that we are really engaged in will really be losing grounds. So we need to make that not happen. Otherwise, we really have a problem. But I think it's a lot of threats around in the short term.
And Pema, to conclude this one.
They really struggle to put a figure around that. But depending on the optic, I think you can either say 10%, 10 out of 10 for threats or 10 out of 10 for opportunities. So it really depends on how you look at the perspectives.
Yes, exactly. We had one question here, and we have time for some other questions. I see two hands there, so please, but you are next.
I'm Shalogna here. I'm from SAGA, Science and Geopolitics of Arctic and Antarctic. We have a think tank and working for quite 15 years now. The question is, so we have AI, you mentioned AI, and we have expensive science because, we need to, for example, like things like permafrost, you need to be on ground to see a lot of variables. Why are we not looking at citizen science? So if we promote citizen science with AI, like the way you have in Fiji and Indonesia, they've done with floodwaters, you can monitor the floodwater and then you have alert systems through citizen science. Then you have this walrus from satellites, which is, I tried to log in, but it didn't happen. But you can count the number of walruses. And in this, I want to know about the NGOs' roles. Can NGOs educate citizens to partner with scientists to do scientific work?
Thank you. Citizen science and the collaboration of scientists and NGOs, and then we will have two more from the back. But first, answer this one. So you want to start, Ravichandran?
Yeah, I think since we are talking about half of the Arctic is data sparse, I think the citizen science, especially if it comes more, because as you pointed out, the long-term data is what is called, it is lagging now. So I think some of the data, maybe apart from remote sensing and other data sets, maybe citizen science data from other parts of this Arctic, maybe definitely it will be valuable. From that we can use various tools and get more information. Yes.
Yeah, very briefly, I think citizen science is important, and engagement as such among the general public. It's too weak today, has a great potential, but there is also improving trends on this, and EU is in particular in their research program facilitating public engagement.
Pema?
Yes, I totally agree. I went on a field trip to a glaciated area, and then the local communities were saying, "Oh, ICIMOD has been going up there and is contributing to the glacial melt," and that shows that we need to involve the local communities. We need to get the citizens involved. So now we are making a conscious effort to ensure that the citizens are involved, not only in understanding about what glacial melt or the scientific purpose is, but also in the process itself. So, point well taken. Thank you.
And Jan,
So
finally.
important, and also one thing that we didn't discuss is the pressure coming from the civil society, the NGO, on politicians. And if we can take 10 seconds, I would like to ask a former politician, how is the impact of the public pressure on your decision? I'm asking the question now.
Well, that's a good question and a short answer. No, two things I would like to say, because I think, of course, and that's why I think it's so important for the scientists not just to talk between themselves, but talk to the public, because of course politicians listen to the public. Yeah. And what was worrying me, not least after the pandemic, was the fact that so much disinformation and misinformation was going on that it was a really tough job to stay on message and listen to science and data. The other thing that I would like to mention concerning citizen science is the fact that in my home country, Iceland, we have actually a lot of data on weather and natural phenomena back to the centuries, because every farmer that could wrote a diary. What happened to the moon today? How was the weather? It was snowing in June. So we have extraordinary data because everybody really was participating. And that's why we are still obsessed about weather today in Iceland. But I had two questions in the back. And yes, please, you are here. Yes, please. And we will finish with those two questions because the time is getting short.
I have two questions. First, what is the way out to control the military budget invested in the Arctic by superpowers? And how we are thinking to restore the marine life when we are depleting the resources with a faster and faster rate? And one question is for my Quebec expert. So, sir, two of our Canadian Prime Minister, first Sylvia Trudeau and Justin Trudeau, both have highlighted the Arctic politics in their whole foreign policy. And Arctic was a reason for that hotline between Canada and America was also being shut down for a while when he proposed the Canadian Arctic Water Pollution Prevention Act in 1969. So how do you think why, because Quebec has a very little share in the Canadian Arctic, then why it is so important for the Quebec Prime Minister for the Quebec, they are highlighting the Arctic sovereignty for a greater height, and it is a very important, it was the top listed priority by Justin Trudeau.
Thank you. And I think I will take the other question also now, so you can actually close and answer. So please, you were there, you were the one. I'm sorry, but we can't have time for, this is the last question.
Thank you to the entire panel. I am Shantan Bandyopadhyay, a junior research fellow of Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. My question is to the forum that, sir, when we see the climate, for the climate change, we see the Arctic Circle, the entire climate, there is melting of glaciers, and there, we see that northern sea route is opening up. So, will it be difficult for countries like India, where you have limited resources, so to have a development versus environment debate? Because when we try to do sustainable development and you have limited resources, you always have to choose between limited resources, so it will be very difficult for countries like India. And the second question is, sir,
you have to be very quick now.
Yes, sir, very quick. As you are in the government, so does India has any policy of opening up a climate change envoy position or an Arctic envoy position in the near or medium future?
Thank you. Now, I will give you each 1 minute because lunch is waiting. It was on militarization, it was on Canada, and it was also on India and the limited resources. So, minute from each and every one of you.
I love the accent, really, but I didn't understand the question. But I really love the accent.
It was on increased militarization and also the role of Canada, and there I did not quite also follow because I'm not familiar enough with the history when it comes to the Arctic.
Okay.
So
something
on militarization maybe in the Arctic?
Well, we're not involved really in, but we are really involved though with icebreaker. So this is something that we will really look, very closely with our friend from Finland. Now that it's a Quebecers who owns the shipyard, so we will work really closely on that. For defense, of course, but for science also.
But are you worried about increased militarization?
Oh, yeah. Well, of course we are. And, from what we heard, the Trump administration said that border are just a line, which is, word, of course. So, but I think also it's very important to protest when we hear those things, and we need everybody together to protest against, those moving lines for border or invasion of Greenland, or we have to stay together.
Ravichandran, the limited resources of India to move on to the energy transition, etc.
Yeah, actually, not energy transition alone, but also we are looking at the climate change perspective, as mentioned about. Definitely, we are more worried about what is the changes happening, and we are making more resources, scientific research actions, not only in the observations as well as modeling and various aspects. With all the countries together, we are trying to understand the process, what is happening, so that we can have mitigation or any other things in place.
Should we use all those resources in the Arctic?
Yeah, marine environment maybe. Try to answer that one. Yes, there are reasons to be worried about the marine environment, but having said that, I will also say that the world really have put the oceans, including the marine environment, on top of their agenda. It's on the G7 meeting, it's in the UN, it was in the Danish chairship with biodiversity, climate and ocean. And I would also like to point to this high-level panel for a sustainable ocean economy, which like-minded 18 states have come together, and they have made very, very clear actions that they would like to take to have a balance between value creation and also protecting the environment. So many things, good things are going on actually on that area.
And Pema, you get the last words here.
Yes, I'll just take this opportunity to thank President Grimson and the Arctic Circle, your team, for taking us on this journey. Actually, I accompanied the Arctic Circle Assembly since 2013. So I think this exchange of experiences, learnings have really helped us also to look at how we can negotiate the complex process here. So we looked at the governance system, the structures, the processes, and see how we can adapt it to the Hindu Kush Himalayan region. So thank you very much. And I think this has also facilitated the development of partnerships. So, out of the Arctic Circle, Japan and I think in the Reykjavik thing. We have developed also now a collaborative program with the Ocean Policy Research Institute of Japan through Sasagawa Foundation. And I hope that this will create further opportunities for building that kind of partnership. Finally, on behalf of ICIMOD, I would like to thank the government of India for the continued leadership and ownership in dealing with the complex situations that we have related to climate change and so on. Thank you.
Thank you all, dear panelists. Let's give them a good applause.